I love a good cheap lens. Now I know that doesn't make a ton of sense. Usually good lenses aren't cheap and cheap lenses aren't good. But I think there's a sliver of the market that makes good lenses at an affordable price that offers good value, it's a good price point, and it offers good quality still. And I think the 50mm f2 from TTArtisans fits perfectly in that category. A good, cheap lens. At the time I'm filming this video, this 50mm f2 from TTArtisans is under $100 USD, making it the cheapest lens I've ever used. Well, the cheapest new lens I've ever used, but we'll get into that a bit later. So, how does TTArtisans keep the price point of this 50mm f2 so low? It's not the build quality, because the build quality on this lens is fantastic. It's nice and small, but it still has a nice heft to it, and that's due to its all-metal construction. This thing feels strong. I'm not worried about it getting damaged or getting nicked or dropping it because of that all-metal build, and that's really nice in a lens of this price point. Some of my more expensive lenses from Tamron even use plastic, but this 50mm f2 is all metal. The design of this lens is pretty simple. Up front, you have your focus ring that lets you adjust your focus. You have some markings for distance, and then at the top, you have this really narrow aperture ring. Now this aperture ring does a good job at adjusting the aperture, but like I said, it's really narrow and I find it really hard to grip, and I didn't love it. Sure, it'll change the aperture and it does a good job at it, but I wish it was a little bit thicker. I would have taken a bigger lens if it made that aperture ring just a little bit easier to use and control. This aperture ring is clicked and it feels fine. It's not super satisfying when you spin it. The clicks feel a little too dampened for me, and it's not a solid slot in place like on some of my more expensive Sony lenses. But that being said, for the price point, you can't expect that. So how did TTArtisans get this lens to be so inexpensive? Well, they did that by making it a fully manual lens. There is no electronics in this lens, it doesn't talk to your camera, and there's no focus motor. So what does this mean for you? It means that obviously you can only use manual focus with this lens, and you won't see your f-stop on your EVF or your rear screen of your camera. You have to look at it on the lens. But there are some benefits to this. The reason this lens is so small is because there's no electronics. If you were to put a focus motor or electronics into this lens, it would grow in size, and this is probably one of the smallest 50mm lens I've ever seen in my life. More important than build quality is the image quality of a lens, and I was happy with the image quality of this lens. Is it the sharpest lens I've used? Definitely not. Is it sharp enough? Yes. It kind of reminds me of a similar sharpness to that of a kit lens, maybe a little bit softer. But this softness isn't necessarily a bad thing. With modern glass being so sharp, people are trying to take sharpness out of their images. Whether that's taking down the clarity in post or using a diffusion filter, this softer look is something that's a bit more sought after. I recently did a video where I shot with a vintage Canon FD 28mm f2.8 lens, and the softness of this lens kind of reminded me of that nice vintage look that you get from using vintage older glass. A little bit softer, not as harsh, not as detailed, but it makes a nice pleasing look to your image. Lots of people purposely shoot with vintage glass to get that softer look, to get the character these older vintage lenses have, and I think this 50mm f2 from TTArtisans brings a little bit of that into a more modern feeling lens. They're not clinically sharp, but it's not a bad thing, and I kind of enjoyed having that little softer look in my images. It made for a different change of pace and allowed me to get a little more stylized with my photos. Here's the thing though, at the beginning of this video, I said this was the cheapest new lens I've ever used, and that's because of vintage glass. I've gotten some vintage lenses for $40 or even free. So if you're getting the same or similar quality to vintage glass, it makes it a bit harder to purchase something like this 50mm f2. But here's also the thing, to get a good quality vintage glass, you're actually going to end up spending a bit more. Something like the 28mm f2.8 I recently used goes for a bit over $100 depending on the quality. So you can either get this cheaper 50mm f2 and get a similar look, but pay a little bit cheaper, or get vintage glass that may even have a more of a unique look and a little sharper than this 50mm f2, but you're paying $40 more. You have to decide if it's worth it for you. So who is this lens for? I think personally, if you're looking for a really small 50mm prime, this is a great option. This would sit awesome on a camera like the A7C II or the A7CR. It would feel nice and compact, and it'd be a great daily carry or daily walk around lens. This is also great if you're looking for a cheap 50mm prime. Unlike vintage glass, you can get this brand new, you know it's gonna work, you don't have to do a ton of research, it's easy to go on the website and pick it up, where vintage glass is a little bit more hit or miss, and you can get damaged lenses or lenses with fungus. You know if you pick up this 50mm, it's gonna work great. The last reason I think you should pick up this lens is because it's fun. I wasn't expecting to like this lens as much as I did, but it was really just a fun lens to have in my camera. It was different than my other lenses, it was a different experience, and I really enjoyed that. I think if you got $100 laying around, maybe it's a gift card or a birthday gift, and you want to go out and buy a fun lens that you wouldn't normally purchase, but you have the money laying around, this is a great option. I also think if you're gifting something to a fellow photographer, this could be really cool. It's not something they would probably buy for themselves, but if you gave it to them, they would have fun with it and they'd really enjoy using it. For now, go ahead and create some content. Thanks for watching.